every one of you for taking the time to spend just a little bit of your afternoon with us. I apologize for standing in front of our esteemed group here. I wanted to just start by telling you a little bit about what the book is and how we came to this idea and what its meaning is. We formed a group called the Tuskegee Auburn Women's Leadership Alliance. And we did this because, well, probably they'll all tell you a different reason, but I felt that the reason was many of us continue to feel like there's something that prevents us from being able to achieve the toppest positions in leadership at universities. Every semester I ask my class, tell me if this is true, do you think we'll ever have a woman as the President of the United States? And they're like, oh yes, surely. I mean, with 5 women running, I mentioned that we would have 5 women running, another to announce on the 28th. Surely we could have a woman be the President of the United States. Then I always ask, do you suppose we will ever have a woman President of Auburn University? And they unequivocally always say, oh no, never, that's not going to happen. And that's very interesting to me. And so we wanted to start to get into the ideas about what it would be that would prevent us from trying to be the President of Auburn University or Tuskegee University. When we started this project, at that moment, Tuskegee had not had a woman named president. However, they'd had a woman sit as president for a long time. We wanted to know why it was that in the esteemed halls where these presidents' pictures are, this woman could not have her picture there and be named the president. The same, of course, is true at Auburn. You can walk into Sanford Hall and you can see every one of these pictures, every one a white male. And it goes on down from president. Of course, we know the same is true with the Board of Trustees. I hate to have to mention that there's only 2 women of 16 members of the Board of Trustees at Auburn. Tuskegee's numbers are a bit better, but still not a critical mass. Not enough to make policy and set change in the kind of direction that we want. This is where we started. Now, we don't want to take all the credit for it, but in the process, Tuskegee has named its first woman president. And I hear that there are many, many, many women running Tuskegee and sitting on the stage and sharing in the policies that are being made that are affecting our students and helping our students understand who they can be. Who they can be. You've heard it. If you can't see it, you can't be it. We decided that the best way to come at this issue was through our relationships. This is called relational leadership. That we could probably move ourselves a little bit forward if we encouraged and trusted and listened to each other. So we went into a process of discussion. And you'll see something from an article called Having Our Say, little bullet points on the table if you choose to look at it. And we started with these questions, and they were hard questions like, why are we put in competition for resources with the people that are supposed to be the closest to us? And what does that do to our relationships with our colleagues when we have to compete with the people who we are the tightest with, who we love the most, who we want to work with? These kinds of questions. So we got into these discussions, and we started telling our stories, and it occurred to us that we could give ourselves the gift of a symposium and do professional presentations about our own stories. And so you may remember a couple of years ago we did this symposium called Outside In, Voices from the Margins, and we brought in Mae Jemison, and she was our keynote speaker, and it was a fabulous symposium. In fact, so many people came pouring out with their stories that it occurred to us, maybe these stories would be interesting to try to cultivate and write into a cogent narrative of what exactly has happened to us. What we didn't expect, though, was when we started to write our stories, it was really hard, and the process was so complicated. And what normally happened is we would set out to tell the story of what happened to us, why I'm not running the world, the reason is because, and we would inevitably come to this block that forced us to look at ourselves and say, you know what, maybe I'm not running the world because of something I did. and we had to write our way out of that. So the process of putting the narratives together was really painful in some cases. And in many cases, I would also say that the process itself was probably almost as valuable to us as the writers of these narratives as it will be to those of you who read the narratives. And this is what we often say about femininity and feminine leadership, that it is so process-oriented that in fact the process is just as important as finally what's in the book. We do believe that the process that we entered in could be continued and entered in among all of you and many, many other people. And this is the first time we're going to talk somewhat about our stories, and then we're going to go over to Tuskegee and do the same thing. And then we hope to go to a few other universities, possibly Troy, possibly AUM, wherever we're invited, and see if we can't get more stories so we can't get to the bottom of the question, will there ever be a woman president of Auburn University? With that said, I want to say that each one of these people I have a special relationship with myself, and I feel so blessed and lucky and happy that they're all here, and quite embarrassed that I'm standing in front of them, but at any rate, they will introduce themselves to you, but let me just say, Chippewa Thomas was with me from the beginning, helping me understand concepts, trying to figure, she's the one who brought having our say, the essay, to me. Julia was my student at Tuskegee, so, you know, what can you say? It doesn't get better than that to have somebody stay in your life that many years. Andrea Baldwin, you probably remember, taught here in Women's Studies for quite some time, and now has a great tenure track at Virginia Tech, so she said she actually gets to see Nikki Giovanni quite regularly, so she's pretty lucky. Of course, my colleague Caroline Gephardt, and we go back further than we're going to talk about. We go back quite some ways, but always with me on every project that I ever do. And her colleague Vivian Carter hopefully will be here soon. Minerva Browse, hey Minerva, who also ended up getting a tenure track job, who worked with me in the Women's Leadership Institute for quite some time. We're so delighted to have her back, as well as her little one. Hello there. Yolanda Tyre. Did I say it right? Tyree, who I only knew through emails and so forth. We'd gone over to AUM to talk to women there about their experience and their leadership experience, and I met a colleague of Yolanda's, and they got together and wrote an essay and went through the process with us, and she's here today. Of course, Sarah Nobles, who she was the one who was kind enough to do the bibliography of the book. Thank you very much, my least favorite part. And my co-editor, Joyce DeFries, who read every essay and helped me put them in a fashion where they would be cogent so that you can read through the whole book and enjoy it. And with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Thomas, who will tell you a little bit about her experience. Chippewa?
Thank you, Barbara. In the spirit of relational leadership, I would be remiss if I didn't start from an authentic place, a congruent place, by saying how fortunate I have been to have a professional relationship with this woman right here. This chapter, chapter 4 of the mission, congruence between the mission and the mission maker, would not have been possible without Barbara and certainly our relationship. And certainly the experience that I've had with the Tuskegee Auburn Women's Leadership Alliance and my co-contributors on the panel today, because I've learned from them. So although I have a reflexive autoethnographic contribution to this book, I've learned so much from reading the other essays and perspectives, and certainly out of the spirit of relational leadership, just want to start my remarks with that appreciation and gratitude. When Barbara and I first spent time together conceptualizing the alliance and learned more about the vision that would become not only this work, but the Tuskegee Auburn Women's Leadership Alliance, an outreach symposium that was held in 2015, I was really struggling with, I wouldn't say a career crisis, but some career questions. And it took a process, as Barbara spoke of earlier, of introspection, self-examination, exploration of what was meaningful to me as a academic, as a scholar, but also as a woman. And so I can't certainly encapsulate in my remarks all that I would want to say about the process, but there are a couple of things that I've distilled in reflection that I want to share with you today. First off, one of the things that really resonated out of this process is the sense that we have not power because we don't think we have power. The other is that to think we have power, we should study ourselves and be reminded that each of us has within us a requisite variety. We have aspects of ourselves that we can even reference or draw upon to help us do the things that we set our minds to do, set our hearts to do, set our spirits to do as a vocation. And when I think about that, I think certainly about my profession. I'm a counselor educator, a mental health, clinical mental health counseling professional. I prepare master's level and doctoral level clinicians, but those who would be future educators of the future workforce of mental health. And I am humbled sometimes when I think about the prospect of the imposter syndrome, or the sense that I'm not good enough, or that I can't achieve, not just because of external barriers, but even because of some of those painful internal barriers that I might harbor. So I was one of those individuals that was at one point not considering pursuing promotion. I've already achieved rank promotion to associate professor with tenure here at Auburn University. But I was like a lot of other women academics who said, I don't want to put myself through that process. I don't want to subject myself to what I thought might just be an arduous process. And in thinking about and reflecting on why I was maybe making that choice, or even thinking about that choice, it was through that process that I realized that I needed to first own my own sense of power. And that could only come from one place, first and foremost. And that was within me. And so there were some things I had to face about my own mental health, or incongruence, about my own career health, that I had to address before I could even declare whether or not I wanted to pursue movement and energy toward my next career advancement. And so, again, from a very personal but yet professional place, I was able to get to a point where my thinking shifted as a result of that process. And I'd like to pause here and just simply say, it matters what you think. It matters what you say, especially to yourself. That can contribute to your own sense of self, your own sense of power. And if you're constantly repeating the things that you see in terms of images or lack thereof, you can subject yourself to less than, not good enough, not appropriate, all the things that maybe we see or that we tell ourselves. When in actuality, It's quite the contrary. And it can impact your mental health. So I just simply want to say my goal, I think in the end, in reflecting on the chapter, was that we have control of our own health outcomes. And in so much as we are tools in that process, we should not self-sabotage. Although we may wane, question, waffle a little bit, doesn't mean we have to stay in that place. Insight can be cathartic. Introspection can be a pathway to greater psychological, emotional health. And when you're able to do that, tell yourself, mentor yourself in conjunction with the support of others, or even through your vocation of helping others, you can bring into alignment what you do and what you say and who you are in that process. I took away from this experience that learning is lifelong and that I am passionate about that. I'm not giving up on being a scholar and continuously inquiring and learning more. The prospect of literary pursuits and research interests are exciting to me. I just need to find the time to do more of it. But this really excited or reignited a passion for even research in the area of mindfulness, trauma-informed care, counseling practice that really gets at those things that keep people in dark places. This chapter, in rereading it, really helped to empower me that I have more to say, I have more to help, I have more to do, but I've also got more growing and more going as well. So I hope you enjoy not only my chapter, but all the chapters, because I've learned some things that I didn't know from these sister colleagues that are contributors to this book, and the learning continues. Thank you.
Good evening. I also would like to thank my former professor, Dr. Baker, for encouraging me to include a narrative in Outside In Voices from the Margin. I greatly appreciate her mentorship and support over the years. So one of the questions that is listed in the handout that's on the table about notes from heaven, I say, that resonated with me when we first were prompted to think about including something in a book was, do we screen, analyze, or alter behaviors and thoughts so that we will not be perceived as threats by our colleagues, administrators, or students? So that question resonated with me in the sense of how I am perceived upon entering the classroom on the first day before I even utter a word. So at first I, didn't really feel like I had anything to write about, and so that question resonated with me. And from there, my process for writing chapter 1, Negotiating That Space of Uncertainty in Academia as a Black Woman, started with the query: how do Black women in academia navigate and forge unwritten spaces of exclusion? This question eventually became the lens for the chapter, as I more specifically pondered on another query: how do specific identities trouble space in the classroom? I decided for my piece to demonstrate how two noticeable identifiers trouble the space for Black women and consider other identifiers that often pose a problem, complicating the classroom space. And for me, it was my height and Blackness. So then I was tasked to find a literary or historic figure as a frame. And I chose Sojourner Truth as an interlocutor to frame my navigation in academia, because I was struck how particularly the descriptions of her height troubled the space she occupied when she entered the 1851 Women's Rights Convention. As I continued with the process, I used Francis Gage's observations of Sojourner Truth as a framing piece to reflect on my own experiences and draw upon similar instances from the notes written about truth to explore how I navigate that space of uncertainty in the classroom. And also included other Black women, such as Roxanne Gay, who in her essay, she says that, you know, I'm tall, not petite. And so that kind of struck me. Also included Zora Neale Hurston and Michelle Obama in terms of the way that they navigate space. To talk about, to glean from them how they deal with negotiating space. I found the roughly 2 to 3 year process of writing this book chapter cathartic, as it afforded me a space to candidly convey my personal experience as a Black woman in academia. Initially, I was anxious about sharing this experience, as it was in some regards painful to reflect upon. But putting my narrative on paper took the sting out of it and allowed me to, as I conclude in my essay, legitimize my existence. By inserting myself in the narrative, I was able to forge a space for myself and offer support for those who experience similar challenges. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank Barbara and Joyce for doing a wonderful job on this anthology. And my chapter in the book is chapter 2, moving forward and looking back, transnational feminist spaces, margins, methods, and modalities. And when we submitted this chapter, because this chapter was submitted as a co-edited chapter, a co-written chapter with Laura Pratt, who's when Barb got the chapter from us, she asked if we could divide it up, and my chapter go first and Laura's go second. And Laura at that time was a student here at Auburn, an undergraduate student who was doing a minor in women's studies, and so she worked with me. She took a few classes with me, and in taking those classes, we found that we had a synergy, and that there was this method of teaching that I had been taught when I was a student, a method that was anchored in a Caribbean feminist pedagogy and praxis that was coming in really handy for me as a person who is Caribbean, who was not born here, and who was not educated here. None of my education is from the U.S. I was educated at the University of the West Indies in Barbados. And I found that the reason why I call the chapter Moving Forward and Looking Back is that I pulled a lot from my experience growing up in the Caribbean and being around Black women who were professionals, Black women, seeing Black women all the time in positions of power, and coming to the academy, and I was like, whoa, where Black women at? And not seeing anybody really that looked like me. I mean, I met Chippewa, but in my immediate sphere, I didn't see anybody that looked like me, and so I had no methods or modalities or anything to kind of build from as a person who was very alien and foreign to this space. My first time stepping on a campus in the U.S. was when I came to meet Joyce, who gave me a job. So I felt like in order for me to be successful, I needed to pull on something that had been taught to me elsewhere. And so I started to develop a transnational praxis that has been serving me well so far. But what I found in writing this piece specifically is that I have been grateful for the opportunities that have been given to me in this space. And I felt that at some points that sense of graciousness have hindered me from being critical. And writing this particular piece helped me to be more critical, helped me to see that, yeah, you were not born here, you were not educated here, but you were here. And You were here because you worked hard to be here. And though you were given an opportunity to inhabit this space, you should not make any excuses for things that happen. Like Barbara said, you know, like we have to write ourselves out of this is a space that is sometimes oppressive of us, and we claim that and we stay there, we sit there, and we live with it, and not speak back to this space. And so this particular chapter helped me to start writing critically, not writing in a space where I was not, you know, I was using the theory but not being reflexive. And I felt like this chapter has helped me to open up about the academic space and where I sit in the academic space. And since then, I've written several chapters about being a Black woman in academia. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And I feel like when I started this process, that was the first time that I really started thinking through why my voice should be heard and why my voice should not be deferential, why my voice should say, I'm glad to be here, but sometimes academia is on some bullshit. And so that is where, that is how I came to this, and I felt like this process really helped me to get to the point where I am, where I can speak back to a very, very white, very, very male academic audience and tell them that you need to see me. Yeah.
My name is Caroline Gebhardt, and I'm finishing my 25th year at Tuskegee, and thanks to Loretta Burns, who gave me that opportunity, and Tuskegee is my academic home. I'm very proud to be there, and I'm very proud that we now have an official, Dr. Lily McNair, an official woman president. Having said that, our chapter, and I say our because Dr. Vivian Carter was my co-author, and I know she was at a conference and trying very hard to be here, and I'm hoping that she might still wind up here, but at any rate, I'll have to talk for both of us. Our chapter is titled Working With / In an Invisible Legacy, Women's Leadership at Tuskegee Institute. And we have been involved in a project that is a collaborative project that began some years ago to uncover the history of women's achievements at Tuskegee. And Dr. Gwen Jones, who is a mentor and also a retired professor emeritus, is working on the project with us. And we've done many kinds of things, scholarly presentations, and we nominated Bess Bolden Walcott to the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame, and we've done various things. But this essay was a chance to reflect not only on some of the things we've learned about women's history at Tuskegee, because it's a remarkable story with many amazing characters, and it deserves to be much better known. And we are, you know, hoping eventually to come out with a tome. But we also took this as an opportunity, and by the way, thanks also to Dr. Baker and longtime friend, colleague, co-conspirator, and also all of the women here and the women in the Tuskegee Auburn Women's Leadership Alliance, because that fostered a lot of conversations that were just made us think about a lot of things. And we took the essay as an opportunity also to think about our own paths and where we fit at Tuskegee. And obviously, as a white woman entering a historically Black space, that has prompted me to reflect deeply on things. And let me say that I have been, my colleagues, my students, I've been welcomed and taken in, you know, but at times I struggle with feeling an outsider, or if there's certain things I shouldn't say. And so, and it's made me understand so many more things than I would have ever understood any other way. But so we took this as an opportunity to kind of grapple with our own experience at teaching at an HBCU, which is a privilege, but also, to be very frank, it also has many challenges. These are historic institutions that are underfunded. We have never gotten the support from the state that even though we were chartered by the state, and so our very existence is a continual challenge in some ways, and so there are difficulties, and the other aspect of it is we saw in the history this possibility, these women who achieved amazing things. The first woman to win a gold medal for America was Alice Coachman Davis, who trained at Tuskegee Institute. There are many stories like that. And yet, why aren't they better known? Why is it invisible? That's a question that animates our project. And some of it has to do with, of course, good old sexism and racism, and also the ways in which the institution both supports women leadership in some ways and in other ways does not. So it's a very complicated kind of thing. There's always been spaces for women leaders at Tuskegee, but there's also been, it's also been heavily male dominated at the upper levels. And like other institutions, there is a pay gap in gender. And you know, so there are those inequities, and we want to struggle to make Tuskegee the kind of institution that we envision. And thank you, Vivian.
Is she here?
She's here. She's knocking the door.
Right,
Now your turn.
That's
you.
how I love to make an
So that was sort of my take on it.
Please excuse me, I am coming from like 3 different events today. But I did not want to miss being here with my colleagues. Okay.
Yes.
So, to talk about the chapter,
Yeah.
really, I was very happy when asked to contribute. I think that one of the things that struck me is going back over my journey, the reflection, and just looking and thinking about the diverse groups that have influenced and helped me, whether they intended to or not, and just how that profoundly affects the way I approach teaching, mentoring, and researching these young women on the historically Black institution. So.
Thank you.
This is my turn. Hi, my name is Minerva Browse. I'm the director of institutional effectiveness at Francis Marion University in South Carolina. This is my first year in that position. But a couple years ago, I went in and knocked on Dr. Baker's office, and I've worked with her ever since, even at this point. But I knocked and I asked her, what can I do to volunteer? And so we began our friendship from being a graduate assistant to working with me with my little one. She's still here, Ileana. But along the way, I met my dear friend, Celine. She's not here with us today, but she, say hi, Celine. She's probably watching. But she's a dear sister, a dear colleague of mine as well, and we've been through the journey since starting our PhD program here at Auburn University. And so our journey started with being very naive. Coming in and jumping into higher education and getting a master's and PhD along the way, and then after that, what can we do? What shall we do? And so we started talking with Dr. Baker. Together with Dr. Baker, we put up a gender comparison of HBCUs and PWIs in the Southeast by salary and by academic level, assistant, associate, and full professor positions. And as we started to look at this, I guess our idea came from looking at all the stories we had, and we heard through the Alliance from our mentors, from our professors, from women in higher education, and we're like, what are we going up against? We hear all these numbers, we hear all these stories. How true is that? So we went and we got data, 30 years of data from 1980 to 2011, and we looked at land-grant institutions in the Southeast. So we had about 31 institutions, and so we made comparisons in terms of salary, how much men are paid in HBCUs and PWIs, as well as how many of us are here. And so at the highest level, in terms of academic levels, assistant, associate, and full, who do you think has the highest proportion? What would you say? Assistant, full professor, assistant, associate, men or women?
Men.
Men. Full professor men have the highest numbers in all across 30 years in our data. And who had the lowest? Who would you say? Women what?
Women of color?
We didn't look at race, but we looked at academic level, assistant, associate, or full professor. Which of those had the lowest numbers across all the academic levels and those 30 years?
Full.
In 1980, I think we found out that about 11% of women held 11% and held full professor positions. In 2011, it was about 20%. So we're still very, very small representation. And so when we started to, as newbies, we're coming into the academia, and we're like, wow, what are we getting ourselves into? And so we looked a little bit more, and after doing this chapter, we found out that the Southeast, if we wanted to get parity with men and women for full professor positions, it will take us how many years, do you think, in the Southeast? How would you say? How many years? We did some forecasting. About 80, approximately 80 years. So when I'm gone from here, my daughter, who's sitting here, she wants to get into academia. Maybe not. But it gave us an idea as to what we're going against if we wanted to go into the assistant, associate, and full professor positions. And also, we didn't touch on anything based on the administrative positions, which is what I'm working on now. But and still, at Auburn University, we tiered all men and women that are in administrative positions, and that percentage is very small. And so, looking at those numbers, it was disheartening, but it gave us a push to say, you know what, we can and we should. And if it's not just for me, but my daughter, for all the women that are coming after us, so that we can be able to get those numbers up there and represent and work together. Collaborating with Celine and Dr. Baker, we found our strengths within each other. We have weaknesses, but we supported each other along this process. And that has been phenomenal for me. And even wherever I go, that's something that I always look at. What is my strength? What is my weakness? What can I do to contribute and make things better? And what is it that, if I have a weakness, what is it that I can do to make it better? Who can I work with so that we can support each other and then bring up each other? So, in a nutshell, that's our chapter. Thank you for being here. Really do appreciate everybody that's here.
Well, hello. I'd like to thank you all for being here as well. My name is Yolanda Tyree, and I'd like to start by making sure that I recognize Dr. Baker and Dr. Davis for allowing me to be here. And I'm so excited to be here with this esteemed panel. In some ways, I want you guys to know that I wanted to just go down the line and have you all sign my book. I read your Thank you, Japan. Just it's such a wonderful experience to have the opportunity to work with colleagues of diverse experience and for it to be so welcoming and so open and transparent. I had the opportunity to write with two other colleagues who were at a different university than what I worked at. At the time of me writing this, I worked for Auburn University in Montgomery, and I served in the position of Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. I completed that role last year in November after 10 years of serving in some capacity in student affairs. And my two colleagues professors and do administrative work at Alabama State University. So that alone was just a great synergy and having the opportunity to work with them. Our book chapter 13, which is entitled Navigating the Waters. Make sure I have it all. Excuse me. Women of color navigating, thriving in higher ed. So I messed it up completely. But chapter 13 is another piece. Came out of us really just kind of getting together in some ways just for go time. And us talking about some of the things that were going on in our lives across the city in some ways. And it just evolved to cover 4 main points. So we talked a lot about leadership style and what that might look like for us as 3 Black women in our different spaces. 2 of them being at a HBCU and me being at a PWI. The ability for us to feel like we could share our voice, or our voice having some value from day to day as we engaged and tried to provide support or leadership in our various areas. We additionally looked at work-life balance and the turmoil and balance and the pull of that over the years, as well as mentorship. So that included our desire to have mentorship as well as the areas that we were providing that mentorship. So in relation to leadership style, we all had some challenges in relation to not being seen as an angry Black woman. And it was something that we really struggled to find our place in. Because anytime it appeared that at that time, anytime we kind of raised our voice, or if there was any sort of breathing at all, it could be perceived as negative. Especially, I know that I felt that way in my particular space, and I'm the one here. And definitely working at a PWI, it was something that you feel the looks, that sort of energy that comes with that. In relation to sharing my voice, my particular experience navigated around having one-on-one meetings often with people that I work with, and then I would often hear my ideas in other spaces. So while they might not have been acknowledged in that particular room, it almost seemed like my voice really wasn't heard. Outside of those spaces, literally my exact words would be repeated. And that was something I really struggled with. It was something that really caused me to really have to think about my personal value and what my voice sounded like to me, because I was getting these sort of mixed messages. And so you'll see a little bit of that in the chapter. We talk also about work-life balance and that desire to feel like you needed to work longer, harder. You've heard that before. Longer, harder, more intensive, but we had kids. And how do you balance that out? Because you only kind of get one shot at that. And I was really committed to that. And even in the areas where my boss was lenient, and she did provide me a great amount of space for that, sometimes the guilt that even came with that. Not being there when I knew that everybody else was working, but knowing that I needed to be someplace or wanted to be someplace with one of my girls during the time that they were growing up. And sometimes maybe not being able to show up sometimes when I really felt like I needed to or desired to be there for them. And in mentorship, when you're in some places, I specifically for me, being assistant vice chancellor and coming up to that particular title, I'd been assistant dean, assistant, I call it hazing, going all the way up the ladder. I oftentimes felt like there was not anyone that I could talk to. And it caused me to really have to work to be creative in how I sought out mentorship and sharing that with others. So, now we have a lot of podcasts. Now we can click on YouTube. I love that she referenced old authors or people that lived before us. But it took me some time to get to that space and place and understanding that I didn't always have to be in a room with someone, and to be intentional about that time that I may have. So there were some people who definitely came alongside me and provided me with extensive access. But then there were some people that I knew, I'm only gonna have these 15 minutes, I need to make these 15 minutes count. And then there may be some people that I really may not have the opportunity to be in a space with, but to maximize that by listening or reading or engaging in things. that were going to be needed to move me from one point to the next point. Some definite takeaways that I believe that I gained in writing this particular chapter, or working on this particular chapter with colleagues, was to live my truth. And that really was challenging. I feel like it's taken me the whole 2 years of doing that, as I'm able to reference that I'm no longer in that space. And not to be extremely negative about that, but it was just a place, as Chippewa kind of pointed out, that was really good for my overall health. There were just some places and transitions that I just felt like I needed to make for myself, which have been beautiful for me. So living my truth, being able to explore that and own that in many ways and spaces, whether that's someone asking you negatively, like, so why aren't you there? What happened? And also feeling good within myself about the choice that I made and being able to stand on it. And feeling some comfort and grounding in that. For me, this really helped me to really open my eyes and see that there are so many places for us, each of us, to work, that we have the opportunity to go in places where we are celebrated and valued. And I believe that as I continue to move forward, that part of this journey, which I'm continuously on, forces me to look at that every day. I ask myself, how can I live my best day today? And in doing that, I believe that it challenges me to really stand and be honest with myself and be in places where I can give my best self, not my perfect self, but my best self, and be in a place where I feel like I can grow. And that's the journey I'm on.
My name is Sarah Rosavi Nobles. My starting story is actually very similar to Minerva's. I actually emailed Dr. Baker because I was in my last semester of my Master's in Higher Ed program and I needed to do an internship. So a friend told me to message Dr. Baker, and she would come over that day. And we started working together, and I have appreciated her support ever since. She asked me to write for the book, and I already had an article an essay that I had written from my higher education writings, and it was about women in leadership in higher education. Were the boundaries systemic or surmountable? Meaning that were there these systemic boundaries to women obtaining those leadership positions, or were those things something that we were kind of in our head about, whether it be applying for those leadership positions or doing the extra work or putting in the extra time, were those things that were surmountable? And in my exploration, we kind of found a little bit of both. Yes, there are some systemic things that are very difficult that we know about. We all experience when trying to get into positions. I actually have a funny example that I read an article that somebody had done where there was a place in Australia, or an area in Australia, where they were a university where they were like pushing for more women and more minorities in leadership positions. So they made up a policy. So they said that for every man in a leadership position, we must also hire a woman. And may that be a minority, that also worked as well. So what the university started to do was they would have a dean, or they would have, the president, and then they would hire the assistant dean as a woman or a minority. And so they started to see the very, very top leadership positions remained men, but to satisfy the requirement, they would just hire a woman as an assistant dean or hire a minority. So, yes, is that systemic? That's something that is insurmountable. That would be something that obviously they had in their head, that no matter what, they were going to hire a man either way for those leadership positions. So I did have a lot of those things already. I had a base for my article already. But I had to go personal now. Now I had to add, why did I care? How did it affect me? How did I get to even start thinking about those types of things, those types of issues? So I had to look a little bit deeper and talk about maybe my background, how I grew up. In my article, I talk about how I grew up in a Pakistani household. So I was born and raised here in the U.S. My parents are both from Pakistan, and kind of tried to keep it that way in the household as well. So I had this clash of like, in my house I was supposed to be one person, but when I went outside there was like this whole other world with a lot more freedoms. So I talk a lot about that, and dive into maybe certain situations and things that made me who I am today, made me think about situations in the way that I do, and hopefully made me a person that I can maybe mentor other women who are in situations like me.
So I'm Joyce DeVries. I co-edited the volume with Barb, and thank you all for being here, and thank all of you for your chapters, and thank you, Barb, so much. You're a leader extraordinaire, and so supportive, and I think we can all. So it's my job to round this all up, and I think I'll try to keep my comments very short. So I wrote the afterword at the end of the volume, and I wrote this a year ago in January, and it seems like in January there's a lot of activity, like women's marches and things like that these days. And so that was sort of in my mind to sum this all up, and it's in my mind right now. But the things that I wanted to highlight in this is that it started with getting together and talking. And to me, this harkens back to the classic women's consciousness raising in the early 70s, or late 60s, where women got together and just voiced their experiences and then found out that other people shared these experiences. And that's what it was like for some of these sessions with the Tuskegee Auburn Women's Alliance, where people said, this happened to me, and other people like, that happened to me too. And all of a sudden there could be this bonding across institutions, across positions, where people shared their experiences. That said, and Barb started her comments at the beginning to talk about how it's difficult for women, or it has been difficult for women to reach the highest levels of leadership at certain institutions and in certain places. There is that realization that it's been hard, but I also want to emphasize in this process is that no one was a victim. I mean, there is a sense of like, okay, there are these issues, but all of us, I think, in this process also claimed power, and a number of you spoke to that. It's like, I have resilience, I have power, I have confidence, I can do this. And the themes that came up here about undermining ourselves, I mean, there's plenty of things out there to undermine us. We don't need to undermine ourselves. That's really not what we need to do. And so this idea of getting together and talking is also finding that incredibly supportive atmosphere and working with each other as opposed to against each other to sort of bring us back to this other theme. And to sum it up, because I know we're running out of time, I want to say though that amidst all the issues that we're still facing as women and women of color in academia, I think there is some progress, and I think there is progress that we can see nationally, we can see it institutionally perhaps, but it's also in this room we can see progress. We all wrote our truths, wrote our experiences, related them to our academic discipline, like content in our discipline, whether it was literature or sociological statistics or whatever it is, right? We wrote this, we own this, and we're moving forward, and we all know each other, and we're there to support each other, and that's incredible progress. So onward and upward with the fight for women in power, in leadership, in support, in sisterhood.
If you take just a few minutes and ask, if you wanted to ask any of the writers a question or anything about the book before we go on. Anybody have any points you'd like to bring up or a question you'd like to ask about the book? Yes, ma'am.
How do you find a rat in a warm place?
How do I find a rat in a warm place? Is that the question?
Do you want to do that?
I'll tell you what, we're going to come back to that question a little bit later. but that's a very good question. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, well, I have a couple of points to make before everybody leaves. First of all, I just want to say 3 things before you go. I want to get a picture of the group. And when I say I want to get a picture of the group, I want to get a picture of the group. All of you who came here to support these women today, I would like you to, everybody, to mob up here so that we can get a picture of all of us. After that, I'd like you to go over there and buy this book. After you buy the book, I'd like you to have whoever you would like to sign the book and help us eat the food and mill and have an actual reception. But first I need you to all clump up here.